The kick landed. That is the thing that makes this story different from every other one, and it is the thing people who tell it always get wrong because they cannot believe it. But the first kick landed, clean flush across the back of Bruce Lee's shoulder in a crowded train station from behind, and it staggered him. 3 steps, sideways, the suitcase swinging out from his hand, his shoulder dropping as he caught his balance against nothing. For 1 full second, the most famous fighter in the world looked like exactly what everyone in that station thought he was, a man who had just been caught. To understand how a man like that got hit from behind in a public place, and why the giant who hit him did not run afterward but set himself to do it again, you have to understand that this was not a fight that started on that platform. It had been bought and paid for 2 weeks earlier, in a room Bruce had never been in, by a man whose face he would never see. His name does not survive in the story, the man who paid, and that is almost the point of him. He was rich, and he ran a martial arts school, a big one, the kind that sold black belts on payment plans and advertised in the back of magazines, and he had built a small empire on a simple promise that his system was the deadliest in the world and that his students, for the right monthly fee, would become untouchable. For years it had worked. Then a small man came along with a philosophy that was the opposite of everything the empire was built on, that no single style held the truth, that rank and lineage were mostly vanity, that a real fighter took what worked from everywhere and threw the rest away. The magazines printed it, the students started asking questions, and the man with the empire watched the foundation of his fortune develop a crack and traced it with growing hatred to one source. He could not challenge Bruce himself. He was a promoter, not a fighter, and he knew the difference even if his brochures didn't. So he did what men with money do when they want a thing done and their hands clean. He hired the biggest, hardest man he could find, a genuine article, a former strongman and full-contact fighter built like a temple door, who worked doors and took the occasional job for cash and did not ask questions if the number was right, and the number was very right. The instructions were cruel in their cleverness. Do it in public, where there are cameras and crowds and reporters. Don't kill him. Don't even really hurt him. Just catch him, embarrass him, put the great Bruce Lee on the ground in front of 100 witnesses, so that the story that traveled was not the philosophy in the magazines, but a photograph of the man himself being dropped by a nobody in a station. Humiliation travels faster than truth. One good photograph would do what no argument could. If you want to understand why the giant chose a train station and why he chose to come from behind, stay with this, because it was not cowardice, it was the assignment. The whole value of the thing depended on catching Bruce cold. The station was one of those great old cathedrals of iron and glass, a departures board clacking overhead, a huge clock, 1,000 people crossing the marble with suitcases and children, while trains hissed at the platforms. Bruce was traveling alone, a brown suede jacket and a single case, moving through the crowd the way he moved everywhere, unhurried, absorbed in getting to his platform. A friend was meeting him, a tall American with an afro and a denim jacket, a fellow martial artist and actor who had flown in for the same production and was crossing the concourse from the other direction, close enough to see it happen and too far to stop it. The giant had been waiting by the benches for 40 minutes. He picked his moment well. He was a professional. He came off the wall behind Bruce, fast and quiet for his size, and he threw a hard side kick into the blind spot behind the shoulder, and it landed, because a man walking through a crowd toward his train thinking about his connection is a man whose attention is pointed forward, and even Bruce Lee has a back. The kick landed, and Bruce staggered, and the whole concourse seemed to inhale at once. The tall American shouted something nobody could hear over the trains. A woman on a bench put her hand to her mouth. A porter stopped dead with a cart half-turned. A pair of businessmen near the platform froze mid-stride, one of them still holding his ticket out toward a conductor who had also stopped to look. For that single second, the busiest part of the station went strangely still around the two men, the way a crowd goes still when it realizes, all at once, that the thing it is watching is real. And the giant, exactly as he'd been paid to do, did not pause to enjoy it. He stepped in to finish, to put the small man on the marble while he was still off balance, because a stagger is not a photograph and only a man on the ground would earn the fee. Here is where the 2 weeks of planning met, the one thing the man with the empire had not been able to buy. Stay with this, because the giant had caught Bruce Lee once, and he was about to learn that catching him once and catching him twice were separated by the widest gap in the world. Bruce turned, and the man who turned was not the man who had been hit. There is a difference between a man moving through the world and a man in a fight, and it is not a difference of skill, it is a difference of attention, of which parts of the world you are giving yourself to. Walking to a train, Bruce had given himself to the platform, the time, the connection, the ordinary forward business of a traveler, and the back of him had belonged, for those few steps, to the crowd. That was the gap the giant had been paid to find, and he had found it, but it closed the instant it was struck. The stagger was gone, the absorbed traveler was gone, and what the giant found himself looking at, closing in for his easy finish, was something that stopped him for a quarter of a second he could not afford. A small man dropped into perfect balance, weight-centered, eyes already reading him, entirely and instantly ready. The first kick had landed because Bruce had been a commuter. There would not be a second, because he was not a commuter anymore. The giant threw the finishing kick anyway. He was committed, and he was proud, and he was very good. It did not land. Bruce was no longer where the giant's eyes had sent the kick, having shifted just off the line with a small economical movement that made the enormous technique look, to the crowd, like it had simply missed, and it had, but not by accident. The giant, a professional, recovered fast and came again, a combination now, a kick and a heavy overhand meant to overwhelm the things that worked on the doormen and the drunks and the men who owed money. Bruce read them the way you read large print. He was not there for the kick. He redirected the overhand with the flat of his hand, a touch, changing its line so it sailed past his ear into the air. He gave the giant nothing to hit, and crucially, he did not hit back, not yet, because 100 people were watching, and half of them had cameras, and Bruce had understood something in the 2 seconds since he turned around that the giant had not, that landing a blow was exactly what this was designed to make him do. Because it had come to him fast, the shape of the thing. No angry man ambushes a stranger from behind in a train station and then keeps methodically working to put him down without a word. This was not rage. This was a job. The giant had no grievance in his face, only concentration, the concentration of a man doing paid work, and a man doing paid work as an employer, and Bruce moving, slipping, redirecting, giving the crowd a display that looked like a fight and was actually a search, was no longer really fighting the giant at all. He was looking for the reason, and he found it, because the man with the empire had made one mistake, which was that he had not been able to resist coming to watch. He was there on the far side of the concourse, near a pillar, in an expensive coat, standing too still in a moving crowd, watching the platform with an expression that did not belong to a bystander, the tight, hungry, anxious face of a man watching an investment. Bruce clocked him in the middle of a slip, one glance, and understood the entire architecture of his afternoon in a single beat. So he ended the part with the giant, and he ended it in the way that did the most damage to the plan. He did not knock the giant out. A knockout was a photograph, drama, a story. Instead, the next time the giant committed a huge lunging kick, everything behind it, Bruce simply took his balance. He caught the ankle at the top of its arc, guided it 3 inches further than the giant had meant to send it, and stepped offline, and the giant's own enormous momentum spun him around and sat him down on the marble, hard, undramatically, not struck, not hurt, just suddenly and unmistakably sitting on the floor of a train station with his own kick having put him there. There is no heroic photograph in a man sitting down. It looks like what it was, a large man missing and falling over. It was the opposite of the image the empire had paid for. The concourse, which had been braced for violence, let out a strange scattered laugh of released tension, and in that sound the giant sat on the marble and understood that he had failed and understood it was over. Bruce stood over him, not gloating, and said something quiet that only the giant heard, and then he did a thing that made the giant's employer, watching from the pillar, go pale. He reached down and helped the giant up, and kept hold of his hand a moment, and said something else, low, and turned the giant gently by the shoulder, to face across the concourse toward the pillar, toward the man in the expensive coat. The giant looked, and the man by the pillar, seeing the two of them turn toward him together, his hired hand and his target, no longer opponents, both now looking at him, did the thing that finished his entire scheme more completely than any punch could have. He ran. In front of 100 people, and a friend of Bruce's who had finally reached the scene, and several transit officials now converging, the man in the expensive coat turned and shoved his way through the crowd toward the exit, and running is the one thing an innocent bystander never does, and everyone who saw it understood in that instant that the man fleeing was the man who mattered. The tall American reached Bruce's side, breathing hard, asking if he was all right, staring at the giant, and Bruce rubbing his shoulder where the one real kick had landed, because it had landed, and it had hurt, and he never pretended otherwise, said only that he was fine, and that they should not chase the man by the pillar, because a man who runs like that has already lost more than anyone could take from him in a fight. The giant did not run. That was the other thing that undid the plan. He stood on the concourse, and when a transit officer arrived, he told the truth, plainly, because the man who'd hired him had just abandoned him in public, and a professional remembers who leaves him holding the bill. He'd been paid, he said, to do it here, to make a photograph. He named the school, and he named the man, and it went into a report, and the report went where reports go. There was no photograph in the end. That was the whole of the Empire's defeat, contained in a single absence. The plan had been built entirely around one image, Bruce Lee on the ground, and the only images anyone captured that day were of a large man sitting on the marble, looking bewildered, and a well-dressed man fleeing through a crowd. Neither one said what the man with the Empire had needed it to say. Within a year, the questions the magazines were asking had gotten louder, and the school that sold untouchability on a payment plan had gotten quieter, and the two things were not unrelated. And the giant. This is the part the tall American told for years afterward, because he was there for it. The giant came to find Bruce a few days later, not on anyone's payroll now, and asked without much hope whether a man who had kicked him in the back for money could ever learn to do the thing Bruce had done to him on that marble. And Bruce looked at him a while, and did not give him the warm and easy yes that these stories usually end on, because a man who takes money to ambush strangers has not earned an easy yes. What he said instead was that the door was not closed, but that it was not open either, and that the giant would have to spend some time becoming a person worth teaching before he came back and asked again. And then he picked up his suitcase, the same one, and went to catch the train he'd missed, rubbing a shoulder that would be bruised for a week, the mark of the one kick in his life that landed, thrown by a man he never saw in a station full of people, on the day someone tried to buy his humiliation and got a photograph of themselves running away instead.